Alrighty, well, we are in our final week of our sermon series, Stand Still. And if you were here a couple weeks ago, you remember I shared a story about this guy who was speeding on the interstate and he cut me off and he almost caused me to crash. And remember my first thought was like, I hope this guy gets pulled over. And a few seconds later, my prayers were answered. He was pulled over. And my first thought was, hey, give that man a ticket, right? Give him all the tickets. My line of thinking was pretty straightforward. Hey, if you're speeding and an officer pulls you over, then you should have to pay a ticket. Well, fast forward a few weeks after that, I was driving up 49th Street one day, and in the back of my car were these tubs filled with all these bags of food. As many of you know, one of the ministries we do here is the Pack-a-Sack program, where every week during the school year, we pack a bunch of bags together and provide them to schools with chronically hungry kids so that they can eat on the weekends. And between 2 and 3 schools, we end up feeding as a congregation about 100 to 200 kids each and every week. Well, on that particular day, the person who usually takes the bags up to Largo, there's a school up there, couldn't do it. And so I was headed up that way, and I said, hey, I'd be happy to help. And so I put them in my car. The only problem was that they needed to be delivered that day because they were distributing them at the end of the day. And at this point, it was like 1:50, 1:55, 2 o'clock, and they got out at 3. So I needed to make sure that I could get up there as quickly as I could. So I jumped in the car. I started driving up there, and as I was going up 49th Street, I looked into my rearview mirror, and way in the back were these flashing red and blue lights, and I was like, oh boy, somebody's gonna get pulled over. Stinks to be them. And I kept on driving. A few seconds later, those red and blue flashing lights were getting closer and closer. Then they got right behind me, and I was like, well, certainly they're going to pass me. And then they didn't pass me. And then I got this lurching feeling in my stomach as I began to realize that I was the one that was being pulled over. And so I pulled off onto a side street. I parked the car. I opened up the glove compartment and got my vehicle registration information and insurance. And I rolled down the window. The officer came up and he said, sir, did you know that you were going 52 and a 35? And I was like, no, sir, I did not. I mean, I realized I might have been speeding a little bit, but I didn't realize I was going that fast. And he said, well, you have your vehicle registration insurance? And I said, yep, here you go. And he said, okay, give me a few minutes and I'll be back. Well, he went to his car. And as he sat there running his information on me, I was sitting in the car, and my heart was racing, and the first thought I had was, man, I don't want to get a ticket. And like, if you think about it, I mean, I actually have a legitimate reason for why I was speeding. Like, I'm bringing this food to chronically hungry kids, right? You see, the irony of the situation was just a few weeks before, when that car that dropped me off, that driver, when he cut me off and he got that speeding ticket, there was no doubt in my mind that he deserved to get a ticket. And yet here I was a few weeks later trying to convince myself why in my situation, I definitely did not deserve that ticket. Well, finally, after about 5 minutes, the officer came back, and as he was heading up to my car, I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell him what I'm doing. I'm going to point to the stuff in the back and explain where I'm going and what I'm doing. But friends, before I could even open my mouth, he handed me a $256 ticket, and he had me sign a piece of paper, and then he walked back to his car, and he drove off. And I'm just sitting there with my whole rationalization in mind. I didn't even get to tell him about the chronically hungry kids. And now I have a very expensive ticket in my hand, and on top of that, I am now even later in delivering the food to the kids. Now, friends, the reason I bring up those two instances is to ask you this question this morning. Take a look at the screen. Why is it that we tend to be selectively compassionate people? In other words, why is it that we tend to want to see others punished for their wrongdoings, but not necessarily us, or not necessarily the people we love or we like? Or how about this? Why is it that our situation is worthy of consideration, but somebody else's is not? For example, sometimes Elena and I will be talking, and in the middle of the conversation, she'll interrupt me, and I'll call her on it. I'll say, Elaine, you're interrupting me. That's not cool. And then later on in the same conversation, I'll interrupt her and she'll call me on it. You know what I'll say? Oh, no, I'm not interrupting you. I'm adding a really important detail to this conversation. Right? That's not interrupting. And she'll just sort of look at me like, oh, really? So you can interrupt me, but I can't interrupt you? I see how this works. You see, friends, the reality is this, that oftentimes you and I, we don't hold ourselves to the same standards that we hold to other people. And the reason we do this is because as humans, we are selectively compassionate people. In fact, you remember the story of Jonah?